Tom, I don't know if you, I'm going to guess you're kind of busy. Didn't have a chance to hear David Birnbaum on with us earlier this afternoon, but
I was doing French and English television this afternoon.
Well, it will be available on the CJD800.com website. It's on there right now. And bottom line, I don't know, and I don't want to sort of say this the wrong way, but
frustrating.
Giving him whatever opportunity we could to try to explain about the Liberal initiative to try to introduce 3 language courses, and that we didn't get a good answer of any kind. Natasha, is that fair to say?
I think it's absolutely fair to say he kind of talked in circles, and he seemed not to be fully taking it seriously almost.
Well, okay, take a listen. Brian's got a short clip here. Brian?
There are things we're trying to get done up here against the government that is demonstrably disinterested and sometimes hostile to the future of our community.
That's as far as it went, Tom. They're trying to get something done and then kind of left it at that.
Yeah, I mean, this resembles very much the conversation I had with him the day after he did this famous vote. And it was like, pulling teeth trying to get any answer out of him. The most I could get was this was his vision for the English-speaking community, and he thought it was his mission to say that the English-speaking community had, and he kept repeating that phrase over and over again. He must have liked it. He kept saying, we have to walk the walk. I said, well, what does that even mean? And he said, well, we talk about being open to the French-speaking community, so we've got to do something about that. I said, that means telling a kid that's hoping to get into medical school that they're not going to get into medical school because you've decided that they have to do calculus, physics, and biology in French. They have enough French to work in French, and they'll pick up any technical terms they don't have. But you're deciding that in Cégep that you're going to tell an adult that they have to do this. And, of course, he had no plausible answer for it. By the way, this is not, I repeat, not the Liberal policy. When this was first discussed, and I think that Dominic Anglade has to be given a credit here. When this was first discussed, it was as a way of trying to avoid the notwithstanding clause, trying to avoid any quotas on English Cégep. So it was floated as a trial balloon to try to distract Legault from his mean-spirited intention of targeting English Cégep students. So this came out of nowhere. It wasn't in Bill 96, and it's now going to be in there because of David Birnbaum and because of the Liberals. I mean, that's the reality.
Yeah, it's kind of the way you describe it, Tom. Maybe I'm wrong. I'm thinking to myself, it seems like this Liberal policy is to, sit down and say, try to offend no one, but end up offending everyone.
This goes back to my first experience with language legislation back in the early mid-'70s with Bill 22. I think it was 74. And Bill 22 was an effort by the Liberals under Robert Bourassa to try to wave the nationalist flag. So they offended everybody because the way it was done, all of a sudden, you were removing rights for the English-speaking community. You had these horrible language tests, little children being filmed, and they were shown on the news, kids, 5, 6-year-old kids being forced to take language tests, crying. The thing was a disaster. But that was the typical Liberal thing. We're going to try to have a little bit of this, a little bit of that. We're going to try to mollycoddle the nationalists. This just in. They have no chance of defeating François Legault across Quebec in those rural areas that he owns. But if they also feel like losing the votes that they had in and around Greater Montreal, with 40 seats and with the resurgent Conservatives, anything could happen in the next election. But you've got to show that you've got some spinal column, that you've got some core beliefs, and that you're going to stand up. With regard to Birnbaum, I've known the guy for a whole long time. I simply wanted to talk to him the day after that vote because I couldn't believe it. I said, no, even though they're confirming for me inside that he voted for this thing, that it was actually their proposal, I still don't believe it. And it was there. I mean, but the Minister of Justice, who was in charge of Bill 101, Simon-Jeannet Barrette, played them for chumps. He told them it was their position, and they didn't even check to see in what context that the party had brought it forward. It was a completely different context. And again, Dominic Anglade deserves credit for this because she walked back the support that both David Birnbaum and Hélène David had given to this dog's breakfast.
Yeah, which changes nothing, but at least she did stand up and say something, I guess.
Yeah,
so.
but still,
I mean, she went to Dawson and she fought for that Cégep, and she was, doing a good job of standing up. But I mean, don't get me started on Birnbaum because, again, I'm not surprised that you got the same thing that I got because it hasn't gotten any better since he started.
Yeah.
They don't seem to be grasping just how angry the Anglophone community is about this. They don't seem to be grasping that they will actually lose votes. I think they've taken us for granted for so long, and they've been able to. They're just, I don't know, they're not grasping that.
Well, this was the last straw on the Cégep front, though. I mean, it was assault after assault. This was gratuitous. It was unnecessary. They should have just said no to Simon Jeanin Barrette. They weren't well enough equipped in terms of their understanding of their own positions to just stand up and say, that's not what we stand for. We put that out there when we were talking about no notwithstanding clause and no limits on access to English stage shops as a way of trying to do something differently. But now you're going to try to have it both ways. You're going to limit access to English stage shops. You're going to keep the notwithstanding clause. Oh, and by the way, you're going to tell English kids that they have to do their studies in an English stage shop in French. This is not a French course. Just for anybody who gets confused about this. This isn't about a French course. This is actually taking your classes in your core subject area in French. And by the way, on that, Birnbaum has also tried to walk it back somewhat, saying, no, it would be, not in such key areas. No.
Exactly.
It's written right in there that it's in those key areas.
We asked that question, too, and he tried to suggest that was not the case when, in fact, it is.
This issue isn't going away. It's just festering, and they need a better answer than what they're giving us.
Well, I think that the community deserves better representation than that, and that's the thing.
True.
Because, we've always had the tendency to put all our eggs in that one basket, historically. But I think, it would be shooting yourself in the other foot. There's some guy out there on a one-man party that he wants to have some sort of an English rights thing, revive equality. Good luck with that. That's just going to become,
You're saying that ship has sailed, right?
Just going to keep circling around the drain until it drops through. But I think that Birnbaum, at some point, he's going to have to realize that he doesn't have a lot of support for the position that he's taken. He's completely on his own, and he's really, really sold out the community as far as I'm concerned.
All right, let's talk about what's going on. Montreal putting forth a new plan to combat racism, but it seems to be drawing some criticism, although, frankly, Tom, I would have expected that any plan would have drawn some criticism. So what are you seeing in here?
Well, I'm seeing hope because I see a mayor who actually believes something. And that's always my starting point with this stuff. Sometimes with Denis Coderre, I just roll my eyes. I knew that he was trying to check off a box about something. I didn't sense that it was sincere. With Valérie Plante, I absolutely believe that she is completely sincere. She's going to put money. She's going to put human resources. She's going to put the weight of her own office and the people around her behind this plan to reduce discrimination and racism in Montreal, remove the systemic aspect of it. And, it's easy for people to understand if you take the trouble to give them an example that resonates. Going back 40 years ago, there was a wonderful woman named Carol Wallace. She had a group called Action Travail des Femmes. I think it was the real number was 1,200 bus drivers in Montreal. Precisely 2 were women. They had invented these fake tests that all involved lifting weights, had nothing to do with bus driving. It was just a way of keeping women out of those good-paying jobs in the workplace. And so they fought that, and they won their court cases, because the way they had been won in the United States. So if you explain to people that the way we hire in the public service excludes really good, competent people who could, by the way, be giving great services, in Quebec, ethnic and visible minorities have 1/2 the representation in the Quebec public service than they have in the overall population. So there's only 2 possibilities. Either they're just no good or they're being discriminated against. I'm going to say that I agree with the second possibility, that there is systemic racism, that there is systemic discrimination in our hiring processes. And I sincerely wish Valérie Plante all the best in her efforts, which I, again, believe are sincere.
I do too. Gary Bettman, for me, not the most sincere, perhaps. Here we go again. I'm feeling so. Talk of bringing the Ottawa Senators for some games to Quebec City. Some games. Finance Minister Eric Girard saying, "Hey, we're both kind of on board with this." I believe it from the Finance Minister. I don't know that I believe it from Gary Bettman. What do you think all this means, Tom?
Well, I've actually met Bettman. I actually like the guy.
But you're the one. Oh, okay.
But I honestly believe that this might be a 2-step process. I mean, it's the exact idea that was tried, but was they pulled the plug on it. The owners didn't want to have anything to do with it for Major League Baseball, but splitting it between Florida and Montreal. Are you crazy? But here, I mean, you look at what's happening in Ottawa. They're not making a go of it. They built that huge monster arena that they've got there, but it's
in the middle of nowhere,
No, so I mean, Quebec City, people would line up for weeks to get in to see those games. If you bring back the Nordiques, and by the way, they better not try to call them anything else, but they bring back the Nordiques, it would be a huge event. And you know what? Driving 2.5 hours to that arena, because it's on the wrong side of Ottawa, or driving 2.5 hours up to Quebec City, same difference. Those would be great games to go and see. And the fans in Quebec City are just nuts. I lived up there at the time when the Nordiques were at their top. And I can tell you, when I came back and lived in the West Island, and I was watching a certain Good Friday hockey game between Montreal and Quebec City, rooting for the Nordiques. I don't know, people were really upset with me, but it's a great hockey town, and I sincerely hope they get their team one day.
By the way, I'm thinking, isn't senators the exact same word in French, sénateur, or is it not?
Yeah.
See, they could get away with that.
The same way. Yeah, it's not like trying to say Red Blacks, which I still haven't quite figured out as a name.
I wanted to be in that meeting. Tom, thank you very much. Appreciate it.